Turn your Bibles to Luke chapter number 12. While you're turning to Luke chapter number 12, let me just say, the first service we talked about that simple question that could change and remove all doubt. Is God good? The idea of if God is really good, then I can trust him with his guidance, I can trust him with my brokenness, and I can trust him with his protection. And let me encourage you to think about that over these next couple days and get in a habit of beginning to question that before you fall into temptation or you struggle with a trial. Stop and consider that question. And then let's see, this morning we talked about the idea of our thought life, and our life leads to the direction of our strongest thoughts. What we think about most, what we dwell on most, the way we dwell on things the most will probably be the direction our life tends to go. And so it's so important for us to know not only the lies, not only our negative areas, but to know God's truth so that we can apply it to those situations. And I was trying to think if there was a theme behind what I'm trying to preach over these few days. And I think really the thing that just comes to mind is the stewardship of the things that you and I can do. Okay, we can consider our actions. We can consider our thought life. Tonight we're going to talk about considering our life and our direction of our life. But it really comes down to the idea of stewardship. And I hope that as you leave tomorrow, or if you leave tonight, that you'll step back into your world with a better ownership of the things that you've been entrusted with. Your children, your family, your soul. And so tonight I think we'll play into that. Luke chapter number 12. We're going to look at this passage in just a second. Before we do, though, how many of you are New England Patriot fans? All right, good. I'm in good company. The rest of you can leave if you want. Now, I'm looking forward to a good year for the Patriots again. And I moved here a few years ago, and I was always a Tom Brady fan. Originally from California, so I was definitely a Tom Brady fan. But since moving here, I was able to make that public. After living in Atlanta for a while, I couldn't always talk about that. But I'll never forget, a few years ago, I saw an interview with Tom Brady. Perhaps some of you saw this interview. And he was being interviewed by somebody, and they were asking him, and they said, "Tom, you have it all." They said, "Tom, you make millions of dollars in the NFL, and you have all these promotions and advertisements." And the interviewer said, you're generous. For a while there, I don't know if you remember, all of his commercials that Tom Brady was in, you always saw his linemen in them too. It wouldn't matter what brand it was, because he refused to take a promotional role or contract without the men who took care of him every single game. And so his commercials, you'd always see his linemen in there in some way or form, and he'd share the earnings from that. And so the interviewer was talking to him about that and just how thoughtful and a nice guy he was. And he went on to say, "Tom, you're married to, at the time, the #1 supermodel in the world. And you have 4 Super Bowl championships already." And he said, "Tom, you have it all." And I'll never forget Tom looking at the camera, looking at this man, and almost with a little twinkle in his eye. I wouldn't say it was a tear, but you could tell there was something sincere in his eye, and he said, "I know." And the guy said, "What's next?" And he said, "I don't know." He said, "But there's got to be something more. There's got to be something more to this life." I'll never forget that interview. In fact, after that interview, I wrote him a letter. I doubt he ever got it, but I wrote him a letter explaining to him what he was missing. Explaining he was missing Christ in his life. And yet that interview always stuck with me. Because many of us live lives where we think one more promotion, one more paycheck, one more, a letter at the end of our name, some degree or a title or something, one more child, or we finally get married, or whatever that next thing is, then all is going to be good. And yet you and I could look at society today with so much social media. We can see people who have it all and see that it's not enough. There's a book I read. I try to read to my boys every night, and we read Bible stories. We read just fiction books. And there was a book of poems I remembered reading growing up by a quirky guy. To be honest with you, I don't know much about him. But he wrote funny poems. His name was Shel Silverstein. And he wrote a poem book called Where the Sidewalk Ends. And I was reading this to my boys a little while back, and this poem jumped out at me because it was written to kids, and yet the truth behind it was incredibly deep. And in the poem entitled The Search, he said, "I went to find the pot of gold that's waiting where the rainbow ends. I searched and searched and searched and searched and searched and searched, and then there it was, deep in the grass under an old twisty bough. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine at last. But what do I search for now? And I read that poem to them and sat and thought about the weight of that truth in my life. What happens when I find my pot of gold? What do I live for then? And so tonight I want to talk to you about the idea of a fulfilled life. A fulfilled life. How do we actually experience a fulfilled life? In Luke chapter number 12, we find a poignant parable that Jesus told in verse number 15 about a man who was going for all of it. He was trying to get it all. In Luke chapter number 12, I asked you guys to turn there and I forgot to turn there. Luke chapter number 12, verse number 15. It says, and he said unto them, this is Jesus talking now. He says, take heed and beware of covetousness. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of things which he possesseth. That's a truth. That's a biblical principle. Okay, let's look at that again. Take heed and beware of covetousness, the desire, the unhealthy desire for more. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. Okay, I wish we could read this 3 more times, but stop and think about that in your life. What do you define your life by? What is it in your life that you think you will feel more fulfilled if you had it? He goes on to tell a story in verse number 16. He spake a parable unto them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do? Because I have no room where to bestow my fruits. And he said, this will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then who shall those things be which thou hast provided? And he gives us another principle here. So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. And so tonight I want to talk to you about this idea of the fulfilled life. I want to give you 2 problems I see in this passage that I think we all experience. And if not, then I'm just going to be preaching myself because I see both of these problems in my life. And then I want to give you 2 prescriptions, 2 things that can give us victory over that dilemma. Because each and every one of us in here, as men, we're wired to conquer. Okay, it is a part of the way God made us, and he made us that way for very good reasons. Okay, he made us that way so that we can protect our spouse. He made us that way to work hard and to shoot for goals. And there's nothing wrong with ambition. There's nothing wrong with desiring to do better or do more or go further. But the idea of covetousness is that unhealthy desire for more, never being content with what you have right now. And so here in this passage, I see really there's 2 problems that we can all experience in our lives when it comes to this area. And then also in this parable, I see that he gives the 2 prescriptions to overcome that. And if there's a parable that looked like the 21st century, this would be it. I mean, there's not a parable that sounds more and more like what we see today so often. Pastor Ludka could probably testify to this. I know I could. How many men I see that long so badly to get the best job, or let me just say the next job. And they pour everything they can into that new business venture, or that new investment, or that new thing they think is going to just take them further than they've ever gone. And pretty soon they are starting to make more money. Pretty soon they are seeing the fruits of their labors. And before you know it, the family's got a nicer home and they're driving nicer cars and the clothes have bumped up a brand level. And all of a sudden the family seems to be coming to church more and more without dad. And pretty soon the family isn't even coming to church because the boat and the trips and the weekend home and the vacations and everything seems to be going good. And then all of a sudden they show up in Pastor Ludka's office. They show up at our church, Emmanuel Baptist Church, and the wife hates the husband and she just wants time, and the kids have run away, or they're hurt, or they're so bitter against their dad because why they've been given so much more. What they really wanted was just a little bit more time. They didn't really care where the vacations was. They didn't really care where the homes were. They didn't care what the size of the home or the square footage was. What they cared about was dad. And all of a sudden, we see this story right here play out. The man thinks just one more year, just one more season, just one more time, just one more travel, or, one more destination, one more move, and everything will be okay. And the heart attack or the medical diagnosis comes out, or the family isn't there to support them, or things didn't go as planned and they lose everything and their whole world changes. So when I look at this story, I see something that's very, very relevant to the 21st century. And so tonight I want to give you these two problems and the two prescriptions. You guys ready? We awake? All right. All right, here we go. The first problem I see in this passage, our focus can be wrong. Our focus can be wrong. It is possible as Christian men that we are focusing on the wrong thing. And let me say this, even if you're not a Christian, okay, all of us, we have the ability to focus on the wrong thing. And there's really four things I see here that this man was focused on that were completely illogical, okay? The first one I wrote down, and these are alliterated. It's not about the alliteration, but it just happened to play out that way. The first one I see is the earth. This man was focused on the earth. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in this story, apparently he's some kind of farmer, some kind of developer of the land. We know in some way he was expecting a crop to come from the earth, and so that's where his focus was. Now, we're on a farm, and by the way, I am the furthest thing from a farmer. I know very, very little about farming, but I know this. You need more than just land. You need water, right? You need the weather to be right. You need the right kind of conditions, especially back then when they didn't have the same kind of irrigation and stuff we had now. But I find it incredibly symbolic that in this story, this man was focused on the one thing he actually had no control over. He was focused on the earth because that's what would yield him his gain. And I see here that so often we do the same thing. We're so focused on things that we expect to give us some gain that we literally have no control over. For many of us, it's our job. And yes, we have control over how hard we work, and if you're in sales, how much you make. But the truth is, if your faith is in your job, that can disappear in a moment. And some of you in here know exactly what that's like. And so I see his focus was on the earth, but secondly, I see was on enhancement. Was on enhancement. And this story here, his first thought is, wow, because I'm getting more. It wasn't to be more generous. It wasn't to give to more. It wasn't to help. It was, I need to build bigger things. I need bigger U-Hauls. I need bigger storage facilities. I need more square footage. And so we see here that this idea of enhancement. Years ago, a book was written where they coined a new term. The term was affluenza. Affluenza. The idea was we all today have the ability to become susceptible to the disease of affluency. Okay, affluenza. And it defined the term as a painful, contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety, and waste resulting from the dogged pursuit of more. We certainly see that. Today we have magazines that aren't about good homes and gardens. It's about better homes and gardens. The crazy thing is they make it every month. So even if you did everything in there, the next month you're going to find out there's something better. We have car companies like Lexus. They recently changed their tagline, but for a long time their tagline was a passionate pursuit of perfection, which means if you bought their car today, next year is going to be better. We all in here, we have the newest cell phones and iPads. I mean, how many iPads or iPhones do we need? The only reason we want the iPhone 7 is because they made it. I mean, we were great with the iPhone 6 until the 7 came out. We were great with the Apple Watch until the Apple Watch 2 came out. And because there is this dogged pursuit of more, we're never satisfied. We have this disease of affluenza. And we see that here. I mean, he was all about the enhancement. How can he make his life better? Which actually leads to the next thing I see. He didn't just build bigger barns, but his goal was to retire at 40. Right? You see that in verse number 19. And I'll say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease. Third one I wrote down there is his ease. He's focused on the earth. He was focused on enhancement. He was focused on ease. I don't know if there's anything that we struggle or are tempted with more than wanting comfort, wanting ease. You know, like I said last night or this morning, I don't doubt any of you in here aren't hard workers. But you know what we could do sometimes is we can give everything to the job and give nothing to the family. We could give everything to something we're passionate about, some hobby, something we enjoy, and leave nothing for the things that actually matter. I'll never forget when I worked in Georgia, I was a family pastor. I worked with children. We had a children's ministry of about 300 kids. Every week, had the opportunity to help oversee. It was an incredible opportunity. And yet I remember so many times sitting down with families and the wife telling me that the husband would come home from work and just disconnect, and Sports Center would be what he watched till he fell asleep. And no time with the kids, and no times helping the wife, and no time listening to her, just Sports Center. Or the conversations where the man would come home and just jump on the PlayStation, and Call of Duty was his life till 2 a.m. And jump back into the cycle of going to work the next day and coming back. And by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with Call of Duty. I don't think there's anything wrong with Sports Center. I enjoy them both. But when they become our sense of comfort, our Novocaine, if you will, to separate us from real life and the things that matter, that is a sin. And so we see here that he was pursuing ease. I had a pastor that used to always say there are some things God cares about more than our comfort. There are some things that God cares about more than our comfort. There should be some things we care about more than our comfort, because in the end, the danger of comfort is that there's a hesitation to change. The danger of comfort is the hesitation to change. And is it not true that the Christian life is about changing to become more like Christ? It's allowing Him to work in us to make us more like Christ. The danger of comfort is it makes a hesitation to change. And so in our lives, I see that just like him, our focus can be wrong. It can be earth, it can be enhancement, it can be ease. And fourth one I wrote down is entertainment. Entertainment. He doesn't just say, I want to retire at 40 here. He says, I'll say to my soul, that was much good laid up for many years. Take thine ease. And what's he going to do with that ease? Eat, drink, and be merry. Eat, drink, and be merry. He was living for dinner and a show. Let me ask you, what are you living for? Are you living to retire at 40? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that if you can do that. I do believe God made us to work, and I think that I find oftentimes guys who retire early or guys who retire in general, they find that they're ready to go back to work. Sometimes you hear they're more busy when they retire than they were when they were working. And so I understand that, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with retirement. What I am saying, though, is that if our goal in life is to get work out of the way so we can have fun, that's a dangerous place to live. Because fun, in all actuality, doesn't really fulfill us. I mean, there's only so many times that something can bring us enjoyment before we need more. And so I see entertainment. And by the way, I see this so exemplified right now with the Floyd Mayweather, Conor McGregor fight. I love boxing. I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a joke of a fight, I'm sure, but the drama and the hype around it has been is kind of exciting to watch. But you know what's interesting to me is Floyd Mayweather. You know, his God is money. He has made that very clear from the beginning. What he lives for is money. His goal was to retire at 40. He retired at 40 with the best boxing record, or tying the best boxing record. But you know what he found pretty quickly? It wasn't fulfilling. Just one more time. I want to make a lot more money. But one more time. Can I tell you this? I guarantee you, whether he wins or loses this won't be the first time we see him come back. Because he's made it very, very clear his God is money. He wants money. He wants more money. He is convinced that his life will be good with just a few more dollars. I think of Michael Jordan. I don't think his God was money per se. I think his God was attention or fame. He did not like the fact that all of a sudden new and upcoming guys were playing basketball, and it was this guy like Jordan, and Jordan came out of retirement, what was it, like 15 or 16 times? I don't remember now. Tried baseball for a while. It was a pursuit, not just for fame or attention, but a desire to define himself. And in our lives, oftentimes we can be looking for something to bring us a merry heart, as the Bible talks about. Today we have a generation of people who look forward to video games or social media more than their kids. we're more interested in our shows and our movies than we are our marriage. And guys, I'm right there with you. I'll confess, there have been times where my wife and I, just getting the kids to bed is like the greatest finish line, right? I mean, it's a marathon. You finally get the kids to bed. It's 7:30. It's 8 o'clock. It's whatever time, and really, you don't have anything left. Any of you guys with younger kids know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay. And if you're not careful, you know what we find happen sometimes? We get into this mode of, all right, we're just going to sit down for a minute. We'll watch a show. And we go the whole night without talking to each other. We're on our social media. We're watching a show. It's pointless. Go to bed tired. Fell asleep on the couch. Go to bed tired. Get up the next morning. Start it all again. We're so tired. We do it all again. And if we're not careful, we'll look back 2 weeks later and we've spent 2 weeks of having a couple hours every night after the kids are down and done nothing but watch a show. Done nothing but fall asleep on the couch. And then we wonder why we don't feel like we're connected. We're not enjoying each other's company. We look at the kids as a barrier, once we can get them knocked out or whatever we could do to get them asleep so that we could just be comfortable. Guys, can I tell you, the things that are most meaningful in life are those people, those children, that marriage. Maybe you're a single guy. You know what? Hey, it can be the same thing. I just got done. We did a finance class, and one of the ladies in that class, a single lady, said, our temptation is a little bit different. I don't want to be home. She said, I don't want to be home. It reminds me I'm alone. So I go out and I spend money on things or spend with people. And before you know it, I get in this cycle of just every night spending money to try to make myself happy. And there's so many things that I could have been doing to develop myself, to be the person God wants me to be when God brings the right person into my life to marry. And so whether you're married or you're single, it doesn't matter. If we're not careful, we'll get into these habits of just looking for entertainment, just looking for ease, something to make our hearts merry. And so I see the first problem there is our focus can be wrong. It be on the wrong things. Secondly, our second problem, our faith can be flawed. Our faith can be flawed. In Luke 12:19, he tells his own soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat and drink drink and be merry. This man was living the American dream. His portfolio looked good. His business was skyrocketing. His image was escalating. Probably had a great family, a beautiful house, a nice boat in the driveway, but his priorities were off because he emphasized that it will please his soul. What he was focused on is he looked at all those things, including perhaps, and it's not here, but I see it in us, that we look at our spouse or we look at our children as a way to please ourselves. Our wife should meet our needs. Our kids should make us look good. And so it's really important for us to see this second one, that our faith can be flawed here. He emphasized this, and Ecclesiastes 2 verse 18 tells us the same thing this story that Jesus is telling us is, because what Jesus says at the end of this is, you fool. Tonight thy soul shall be required of thee. And then whose shall these things be? All these things you've worked so hard for in a moment can disappear. And then what is your life defined by? What will people remember you for? Ecclesiastes 2 verse 18 put it this way. Yea, I hated. And by the way, Ecclesiastes was a man who had it all, tried it all, did it all. Solomon had the opportunity to do everything you have ever wanted to do, everything you could imagine, and he made his life about finding answers to everything. The Bible tells us he was the wisest man to ever live, and God had blessed him with riches and fame and power and everything he needed to experience life to the fullest. And the book of Ecclesiastes is a summary of that. I would encourage any of you men in here, if you've never read the book of Ecclesiastes, it is a fascinating study about somebody who actually tried everything you've ever thought about. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse number 18, he says, Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. Every once in a while, I hear a man joking about his life insurance policy, and if he dies, it just goes to his wife's next husband. Oftentimes in our lives, we are pursuing something, and when we really stop and think about it, it's like, wait a minute, what am I leaving? You probably have heard the quote before. I've heard it before, that I've never seen a U-Haul travel behind a hearse. We don't get to take anything with us. When our life is over, it's done. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon's saying, I hated everything I worked for because all that's going to happen is I'm going to die. I'm going to leave it to somebody who did nothing for it. James chapter 4, verse 13, it says, Go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow, we will go into such a city and continue there a year, and buy and sell and get gain, whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, If the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. But now you rejoice in your boastings. All such rejoicing is evil. Therefore to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And so here's what I want us to see. Our faith can be flawed. His faith was in himself. His faith was in his apparent gifts. This is the irony when you really stop and break down this story. He was proud of himself for his crops growing. He had very little to do with that actually happening. Even the thing that was making him rich, he relied on the rain that God provided, the earth, the soil, the things that God gave him, the resources he had to make that happen. And that's why in this story, God calls him a fool. His faith was in himself. The man stored the goods, but he couldn't store the years. That's what Jesus was trying to point out to him, or to them, the disciples in this story. The man stored the goods, but he couldn't store the years. You know, if we're not careful, we will go through life with our faith in ourselves. Now, I'm not talking about specifically salvation, but I do want to stop and talk about that for a minute. I said last night, I don't assume everyone here is saved. I haven't got a chance to meet everyone yet. And I know many of you have come to Pastor Ludka Community Baptist Church for a while now. Some of you are brand new. But can I tell you this? If your faith is in yourself, if your faith is in a system, if your faith is in a religion, if your faith is in something other than Jesus Christ, you're never going to find fulfillment in life. You can try. You could try. And that's the Bible tells many stories of people who tried to find fulfillment outside of Christ. But you're never going to find it. Because God left a hole in our hearts, a God-shaped hole in our lives that only He can fill. There's nothing else that can. And people will try to drug it away. They'll try to drink it away. They'll try to sleep it away. They'll try to sex it away. They'll try to do whatever they can to fill that void in their soul that only Christ can fill. And this story is a picture of the gospel because every story in the Word of God is. And the story is this. This man was relying on himself to save himself and had no control over what was going to happen. And in our lives, our faith has to be something greater than ourselves. So what is the prescription? What's the prescription? Value what you have now. Value what you have now. You know, the enemy of contentment, the victory over not contentment. What is the Bible word we were using there? Covetousness. I knew it was a C. The victory over covetousness comes in gratitude. Can I encourage you with something? I assume, actually I know, because the first night, most of the men here raised their hand that they were married. Can you start thanking God for your wife? Well, you don't know my wife. No, I don't. But I know that God gave her to you. And I know that you're flawed and she's flawed. And so whatever her flaws are, you've got flaws too. And listen, thank God for your wife. Thank God for your wife. You'll never appreciate her if you don't start thanking God for her. You'll never see what good is there if you're always focused on the bad. We talked about that this morning. And thank God for your children. Listen, I'm a young dad. I'm at this stage right here with many of those guys that just raised their hand. You know, there are times when it is truly like, if we can keep them alive for one more day, it is a victory. And can I tell you something? Thank God for your kids. The fact that He would trust me with a couple children's souls and their lives is an incredible responsibility. I teach a young couples class, and there's maybe 10 or 15 couples in our class, and been praying with 2 or 3 couples that have been literally just begging God to give them a child. It breaks my heart. It grieves my heart when I hear parents talk about how bad their kids are and how miserable it is to be a parent, and you know how good it was before they could walk or before they could talk or before they could whatever. Hey, let me remind you, be thankful for your kids. Be thankful for them. Value what you have now. Be thankful for your job. Hey, it may not be the best job. It may not be the job you dreamed for. It may not be the job you went to college for, but you have a job. And God has given you a way to provide. And God will provide for you. It's not the job that provides. The job is the gift He's given you to help make that happen. God promises to provide our needs, and oftentimes He does that through our jobs. But thank God you have a job. Thank God that you have a home or a place to live. Thank God that you have family. Thank God that you have people that love you. Thank God that you have a good church. We have people in our church who drive from New York to Connecticut. They drive over an hour and a half to every service because they can't find a church closer. Be thankful that you have a good church. Value what you have now. Next thing. Next prescription. Invest in what matters. Invest in what matters. Luke 12:34 tells us, for where your treasure is. We didn't get this far in our reading, but if you drop down to verse 34, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Luke chapter 12 is filled with great principles. This verse is huge. Where your treasure is, what you value, is where your heart will be invested. There is a direct correlation. How many of you have a dog? Okay. How many of you walk the dog with a leash? Okay. All right, good. Okay. So what the Bible is saying in 12:34 is that there is a leash between your heart and what's important to you. It goes both ways. If I love something, I will value it. I will treasure it. I will invest in it. And you want a litmus test to see what is important to you? Look at what you invest your time, your resources, your love, your passion into. Because if you look at that, it'll tell you exactly where your heart is. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So there's two things we can learn from this. We can see what we value by where our heart is, but we can also change what we value. Or we could change where our heart is by changing what we value. Excuse me. You want to love your family more? Start investing in them more. You want to love God more? Start spending more time with Him. You want to be more faithful at church or more involved at church? Start going more. Start giving more. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I'll tell you, one of the convictions or the guiding principles that my wife and I have decided to do in our life is not give just because we believe that God commands it or because we have to, but because we know where our treasure is, there will our heart be. And so we want to always be generous givers to the church because we want our heart firmly planted in the house of God. You know, we don't ever, well, I mean, we're always trying to be wise. We're not always wise. We want to be, but we never regret I can't say it, regret investing in our family. Why? Because where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So two problems I see tonight. Our faith can be in the wrong thing. Our focus can be in the wrong thing. But I see two prescriptions in this passage as well. One is to be thankful for what you have now. This is what verse 21 is telling us. So he that layeth up treasure for himself is not rich towards God. Be thankful for the things that God gives you. Invest in the things that God has given you now. Verse 34, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. There are two guiding prescriptions, two principles there that will help us in our lives. Be thankful and invest in what we have now, and make sure that we invest in what matters. And let me tell you something. In Jesus' economy, people always matter. People always matter. Your friendships, your relationships, the people around you that God has put in your workplace and in your neighborhood, that's what's valuable. That's what should be invested in. And it's great if you can have a boat and a car and a weekend home. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. God tells us He's given us all things to enjoy. And by the way, even in this story, Jesus says, so is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. It's not that it's laying up treasure. It's that they're not also rich towards God. And so if you're here tonight, and let me say this, if you don't know Christ as your Savior, let me ask you to consider this. Your soul will be defined by something. And if your soul is defined by how much money you make or what rank you are in the military or what your wife or your children do or look like, you are going to die one day and leave everything behind. But if you see your soul as something given to you by a creator for a purpose, it will give you the guidance you need in life. It will give you the value you're looking for in life. And you'll also see the need for a Savior to fix your brokenness so you can spend an eternity with Him. If you are saved here tonight, let me encourage you to consider, where is your focus off? Where is your faith misplaced? And how can you invest in what matters? How can you give more to valuing what you have now? It could change the way we live. It could change the way we invest in our relationships. It could change our family. Most of all, it could change our hearts. Let's have every head bowed and every eye closed. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. I thank you for how well everyone has listened tonight. Lord, as I hear the words coming out of my mouth, I'm convicted and challenge myself. God, I don't want my life to be defined by what people think of me. I don't want my life to be defined by my paycheck or where I live. God, I want my life to be defined by you. God, I want these men to see that living a fulfilled life comes from investing in what you've blessed us with. It comes from having a faith in you and an understanding that you're a good God. God, may we take this parable to heart in our own lives and evaluate that in our lives, if we're storing up treasure here on earth and we're storing up things that are some perceived gain, we're looking for comfort more than usefulness. We're looking for ease more than effectiveness. That God, maybe something in your word tonight will pierce our hearts and help us understand how we can grow in faith and how we can invest in what matters. Where our treasure is, there will our heart be also. With our heads bowed and our eyes closed, before I close in prayer, I just want to ask tonight, and this isn't for me, and so I'm not going to ask for any hand raising or anything like that, but I just simply want to ask you this. In the quietness of this moment in your seat, is there something that you could say, God, I've put my faith in to find happiness. I want to give that back to you. God, I'm looking for fulfillment in some way outside of you. Remember reading in a book not too long ago, it said how sad it would be to climb the ladder in life only to find it leaning against the wrong roof. In our lives, if we're not careful, we'll climb these ladders, we'll get to the top only to discover it wasn't what we imagined. And so for the next minute and a half, I'm just gonna be silent. I'm gonna let you talk to God.